Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We welcome you to this Elder Justice Initiative webinar on Federal State Working Group, Fraud Against Older Oregonians. As with all technology, we may at some point experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. In the event of a problem, please be patient, remain with us, and the webinar should resume shortly. We want to take a moment here to see that everyone is connected. If you do have a technical problem, please type a private chat message to the technical specialist, Jason, in the feedback box or in the chat feature on the lower right. If you cannot access the chat, you can also send Jason an email. That's at jadams@ovcttac.org. If you have questions that come up throughout the webinar, please type them in the chat box. We'll take time, any remaining time at the end of the webinar to address questions. And also note that today's session is being recorded. It will be made available on the OVC-TTAC training website and the Elder Justice Initiative website. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to our host, Yolanda Campbell, a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative. Yolanda.
Thank you, Lori. Hi, welcome everyone to this webinar. I appreciate you taking time today to join us. Just by way of background, this is part of the Elder Justice Initiative series on law enforcement training webinars. We have a number of good resources that are posted on our elderjustice.gov website, and this slide that you see right now is a screenshot of that. And I highly encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to check out the website when you have a spare moment. There's a lot of resources for law enforcement, including the archived versions of our training webinars that we've had ongoing over the last several months. Today we have two outstanding speakers with us. The first speaker today is Shane Winder. He's a special agent from the Social Security Administration Office of the Inspector General. Shane has worked numerous benefit fraud investigations, elder and disabled adult financial exploitation, and assumed fictitious and stolen identity cases. Additionally, Shane is the Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General, Seattle Division's lead control tactics instructor and lead technical agent. Agent Winder is the co-founder of the Social Services Fraud Working Group. Over the past 6 years, this concept spread to the District of Alaska, the District of Idaho, and the Western District of Washington, where other SSFWG agents organized and established the Social Services Fraud Working Group. This working group has also received national recognition from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and in 2016 was given the Inspector General Award. In addition to Shane today, we have Donna Maddux. Donna Maddux currently serves as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Criminal Fraud Unit of the United States Attorney's Portland office. She is responsible for the prosecution of a wide range of federal fraud crimes. Prior to joining the U.S. Attorney's Office in September 2012, Donna served as an Assistant Attorney General and statewide prosecutor with the Oregon Department of Justice for 10 years. From 2004 to 2009, Donna worked in a number of capacities in the Criminal Justice Division as an honors attorney, a line attorney, and a manager. And then from 2009 to 12, Donna prosecuted cases on behalf of Oregon's Medicaid Fraud Unit. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Shane, who will speak to you today about the Social Services Fraud Working Group. Shane?
All right, well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everyone attending today. We want to talk a little bit about what we do here in the state of Oregon and how maybe this is something that you can do in your areas. It's not a complicated concept, but it just takes buy-in by a lot of different agencies and investigators and prosecutors to make it successful. When you look at elder abuse in general, there's a lot of different benefits that an elder person can receive. A lot of those are tied into Social Security, so that's the reason that I, as a special agent with the Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General, get involved in a lot of these cases, because we'll have folks that reach out to me from Adult Protective Services or some other investigative group regarding benefits fraud because we've got a victim. There are so many benefits. I need to give you a quick primer on what you may encounter as far as an elderly victim or a suspect that is receiving benefits. And these all tie back into Social Security, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Most of you are familiar with food stamps. It's also known as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's basically a monthly base benefit that goes onto an EBT card that someone can use to buy food with. We also have temporary assistance for needy families, the TANF. That's for folks with dependent children. And you can buy food with that as well, but you can buy anything with that. You can take money out and just use it as cash on that program. Supplemental Security Income. Now this is a program that's administered by the Social Security Administration. For lack of a better descriptor, it's federal welfare. If you're on this program, you're stating that you have no income or resources and that you are so disabled you are unable to work. And that, again, is a monthly benefit that someone would receive. The retirement insurance benefits, that's hopefully something that we all get when we get around age 65. That's for those that have retired and they have paid into the system, meaning when if you look at your paycheck, you'll see this OASDI. That's your retirement. That's what you're paying into that. Disability insurance benefits, that is essentially if you have paid into the retirement system, but you become injured and you're unable to work for a period of time, you can start to draw on that retirement benefit early, and that's called disability insurance benefits. The medical side of this is the Medicaid. Medicaid, if you think of Medicaid, think of SSI. Those two go hand in hand. You're saying that you have no resources or income, and we essentially pay for your health care. The Medicare, that is for the folks that are normally retired and that are on retirement insurance benefits. You paid into the system, and we've saved a portion of that for your medical. And then housing. A lot of folks that are on SSI are eligible automatically for Section 8 if it's in an urban area or from, it's a rural subsidy that's sponsored by USDA in a rural or country area. So if you look at those benefits that we just talked about, Social Security Administration is essentially the gateway drug of benefits. If you go into the Social Security office and you apply for SSI and you become eligible for that, most of the states that administer the federal funding for things like medical, housing, TANF, and SNAP, they automatically assume that you're eligible if you're receiving SSI. So all the different agencies that you see down here may be investigating different subsets of those crimes. So you may have a victim that's in Section 8 housing, and suddenly you're dealing with a special agent from the Housing and Urban Development OIG. But the only reason that person was eligible to be in the housing in the first place is somehow they went through the Social Security office and were able to get those benefits and become eligible for them. So when I started with the Social Security Administration, I would get referrals from a lot of different investigators that would work their cases independently and then say, oh, by the way, I just had a case, the victim's EBT card was stolen, and here's all the information I have on it. We got a prosecution, at the state level. This may be a good federal case for you. After working a few days, I realized this wasn't making sense. Why were all these agencies working independently of each other? If we know we have one victim and that victim is receiving benefits from all these different agencies, why aren't we collaborating and working together on getting these issues resolved and doing a thorough and complete investigation? As I talked about earlier, all those different benefits come into play, but there's different agencies that are responsible for administering those benefits. So in order for me to get forms related,
You are no longer muted.
get forms related to housing, I need to go through those agencies. So if we're working together, it's just a force multiplier, and we're able to do one prosecution to aid one victim instead of doing 3 or 4 different criminal cases where we're using our time and resources and not working together. So that was kind of the concept in 2010 when I came up with the idea, and my partners here at the U.S. Department of Justice agreed to host it for us. We said, hey, once a month, can we just sit down at the table, talk about victims and cases that we're working on, and push that information out to the different folks that are working on those. So that's essentially what we do. We sit down once a month, We discuss either subjects that we're investigating as it could relate to elder abuse, or we're discussing victims and trying to get that person help. It's been successful. So we bring in, it's not just prosecutors, but we also have detectives at the city and state level. We have special agents from most of the different OIGs, and we also have sworn and non-sworn investigators. So we could actually have, we have a few that are more of a regulatory in function that are involved with our cases. They're non-sworn investigators, but they provide us a lot of information when we're working a case together. Our mission, everyone loves a good mission statement. So our mission statement is to promote and encourage the confidential sharing of information between law enforcement agencies and government investigators who are involved in the investigation of ID theft, the fraudulent receipt of government benefits, the abuse of elderly and disabled, and other related financial crimes. Information is shared to assist members with the identification of the fraudulent scheme and their facilitators. So a lot of times when we work cases where we have an elderly victim, the suspect in that crime is also receiving some type of benefit as well. So if they're stealing from the victim, the elderly person, they're stealing probably benefits, let's say retirement benefits. Well, the bad guy's also on SSI. So now we've got not just the theft of the money from the elderly person, but we also have theft from the government, because any income or resources they're required to report to the government, whether those are ill-gotten gains or not, they have to report those. So it's kind of a twofer on those if we can work together. So when we started our first meeting, that was held on January 13th, 2011. We had just 9 agencies present and 19 attendees. And what I remember about that meeting was it was trying to explain the concept to some of the special agent in charge of some of the different agencies, and trying to get them to buy in to have their agents attend was a little interesting in the beginning. We really had to generate some wins for our group in order for them to continue to kind of support what we were doing. So that was back in 2011. 6 years later, we have 32 different agencies that are involved with our group. We have 150 different law enforcement contacts. So we have additional working groups that have popped up in Alaska, Idaho, Utah, and the state of Washington, but there's also some, I believe there's one in Chicago, and I think Boston is working on establishing one as well. We have the same location, the same time of day, and the same day of the month every month. It makes it a lot easier for investigators if they have that set in stone and they know that it's on that date in their calendar. If you try to move the dates around, it's just too hard for most of us that are working investigations to try to keep track of that. So that's worked well for us, and we've only had to cancel a meeting 4 times in 6 years. One was for the federal government hiring freeze, and the other 3 were for weather-related incidents. This is a pretty comprehensive list of who's involved now, but we constantly have new faces showing up, new people that are invited to come join our group. You know, we welcome everyone as long as they're, you know, essentially law enforcement or government. We don't have any banks or anything like that involved in this, although we do deal with them on the periphery. They're not directly involved to come to our meetings, just because we want to be able to share law enforcement sensitive information. Some of those that, when you look at that list, the ones that stand out to me are ones like the Oregon Construction Contractors Board. I never thought that they would be a really good investigative tool, but they are huge because they get a lot of referrals from elderly victims that will say, hey, I hired these guys to work on my roof and they didn't do anything and they took my money and left. Well, those referrals are great for us because we can go out there and actively find these folks. And if they're scamming the elderly community, it's not just one person they're scamming, it's multiple people. So it's a really good partnership with all these different agencies, and we've really tried to integrate the state level prosecutors. So we try to have prosecutors from each of the major counties in our area attend when they can. We have detectives from all over the state that will pop in from time to time when they need assistance or if they have information to share. It's kind of like one-stop shopping. So a lot of times we'll have a meeting and a detective says, I need help because I've got this victim and I think they're receiving this type of benefit, and here's the bad guy. right after the meeting, he'll be swarmed with people that are trying to provide assistance and help him with this case. So how did we get to this point now where we've been successful? Well, really, from my perspective, back in 2010 when I first started looking at this, one of the reasons that I formed the group, to be honest with you, was a selfish one. My agency, we do not have a lot of agents. I think we're just under 300 agents nationally, and we only have three agents in the state of Oregon, and one of the agents that's in my office also covers Alaska. So we don't have the staffing and we don't have the resources that I would like in order to fight the fraud that we have. So what better way to increase our success rate by including those other agencies that are working the same type of cases that we have, and having the prosecutors both at the state level and the federal level there with us where we can talk about cases together. We also, as a group, there are so many different benefits, and we only really scratched the surface on that primer that I gave you earlier. For example, the Social Security Administration manages 17 different programs, and we only really talked about 3 of those in that primer that I gave you. So when we have these meetings, we'll have folks that come that their agency provides a benefit that we're not familiar with, that we don't know about. So it's really important that we understand if they have a scam or something that's moving through their agency, it will eventually affect us all. So it gives us a deeper understanding of how those programs work, what forms or what documents that we may need from those agencies in order to get a successful prosecution, and just understanding more about their investigative techniques that we may not be aware of. And as I kind of mentioned early on, one of the reasons we created a group is because we recognize that multiple agencies were typically involved in one fraud scheme. If they're defrauding the Social Security Administration, they're also probably defrauding Housing and Urban Development. They're also defrauding Health and Human Services. There's a plethora of state agencies that they're defrauding as well. So it only makes sense that we work together. So what is my role as the co-host? And it doesn't necessarily have to be an OIG agent, although I always like to toot my horn for the Social Security Administration OIG. It could be really any investigator that wants to step up to the plate and host a meeting like this. My role is really to come to the meetings, kind of co-host, add color commentaries, kind of move around the room, bring up any fraud schemes that I was made aware of. I take copious notes, so at the end of the month I can provide kind of a summary of what we discussed. And it also helps to be a street agent. We try to, when new groups are formed, we really try to dissuade the special agent in charge of whatever agency from constantly being the one to show up, only because we really want the agents that are doing the investigations to be there and to be able to talk intelligently about what they're working on. And sometimes the special agents in charge don't have that same perspective as the line agent that's out there working the investigation. Also, we want the agents there to interact with the local investigators from the city or state that they're going to be working with. It creates kind of a synergy there that you wouldn't have otherwise. I'll send out a reminder for the week prior to our next meeting. I'll send out a reminder and a summary of what we discussed at the last meeting. We also, my role is really to network and invite other agencies into the fold. And one of the last things to do too is really try to locate any potential presenters and training opportunities that we might have for the group, either a person that would provide a training at one of our meetings, or one that I hear about that I know that the group would be interested in. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over real quick to Donna Maddux, who is with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the District of Oregon, and she's going to discuss a little bit about the AUSA's role.
So hi, my name is Donna Maddux. I am a criminal AUSA in the fraud unit here in the District of Oregon. I do want to say that I actually started attending these meetings before I was a fraud AUSA here, when I was a criminal fraud prosecutor with the state's Medicaid fraud unit for a couple years. And I found that for my cases, participating in this work group was a tremendous help, both in terms of generic fraud cases, but also in terms of the work we were doing at the Medicaid fraud unit, in combating elder abuse and elder exploitation that was happening, particularly in facilities where people were, where there was a connection or a hook with Medicaid. So what's my role or the AUSA's role when these meetings are hosted here? You know, primarily logistics. We make sure that the conference room is available, and as I think some of you probably know in your own offices, just making sure a very large conference room is available on a regular basis can be a challenge. Just communicating with our building staff to make sure they're ready with name tags and with other just essential logistics to make sure we can get anywhere from 20 to sometimes 50 people in the door in a short period of time can be a challenge. I do want to say that I believe our office really stands behind these meetings and the effort, and so we perceive our role not just as being, the location, but definitely I, as a fraud unit attorney, my supervisor in the fraud unit, and even our criminal chief make a solid effort to attend these meetings on a monthly basis to make sure that attendees know that this is an effort that they support, that it's a high priority for our office to be engaging and networking with the agencies, and more importantly, that if a significant federal case is put together, that we'll be willing to take it, and we'll be willing to talk to folks up front about what types of cases would make a really good or strong federal case, but also to really work through issues with agents and with state prosecutors to discuss areas where maybe a case like this might be more properly bought on the state side. It's our effort every time to make sure we're sharing as much information as we can within the restrictions that we have, but certainly to talk about what fraud trends we're seeing and what things that we think are going to be particularly of interest to the group. We definitely want to continue to, as you all know, the case law related to how we develop our cases, particularly in the landscape of technology and how we seek out that evidence right now, changes a lot. So we know that it's part of our ongoing obligation to the group to make sure we alert them of what's going on relative to our policies and case law and other changes that will impact the kinds of investigations that get effectively worked and the kinds of cases that can then be brought for federal prosecution. And then another thing that we do in the criminal AUSA side of the house is make sure we're meeting with and talking to the special agents in charge for all the different agencies that participate, and really just the supervisors across the board, because when we're dealing with state agencies, we have a number of different levels of supervisors, and we want to make sure that those folks understand why it's important for their people to come to these meetings, because obviously for some of these folks, they're taking a tremendous amount of time out of their day. They are traveling sometimes an hour or more in order to physically be in the room and to network with us and share information. So we think it's important for us to make sure that the attendees supervisors are aware that this is important, that we appreciate their donations of the time and energy of their employees, but we also want the supervisors to come and to play a role in these meetings and to make sure that the attendees are aware of what the many different agencies bring to the table, and that we just continue to have this networking conversation as we move forward.
All right, so everyone loves good case studies, so we've got a couple of them that we pulled out that we've worked on, either Donna and I have crossed paths on or that were generated from our working group. So the first one here is what I like to call the Boutros bunch. And just to kind of give you, well, trying to use a little arrow here to point, but I can't. So the person in the upper left-hand corner, that is Zakia Boutros. The person to the right of her is Iskandar Boutros. The person below him is Jason Boutros, and the person to the left of him is Kilda Boutros. Now this case was originally brought to the group by the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, and there was concerns that Jason Boutros as a paid caregiver, was not providing good services for his elderly mother, Zakia Boutros. However, as the investigation continued, we learned that they were all kind of involved in fraud. So what started off as what we thought was an elderly victim really became one of the players in the case as well. So in this case, both Zakia and Iskandar were receiving supplemental security income because they had never paid into the system. The family had come over from Lebanon in the late 90s. Most of them got their U.S. citizenship, but both Iskandar and Zakia began receiving SSI, and then as soon as they became eligible, decided they were going to go back to Lebanon. And during the course of that, they were later divorced. Iskandar stayed in Lebanon, and Zakia would come into and out of the United States seemingly whenever she had an appointment at the local Social Security office. If you're receiving SSI, that is, as I told you before, that's federal welfare. You're not eligible to receive that if you're not living in the United States. So both Jason and his sister, Kilda, were responsible for one or both parents at one period of time or another. They were paid caregivers at one period of time or another, and they were also representative payees at one period of time or another, which means they were responsible for any Social Security Administration benefits that their parents were receiving. We received enough information to conduct a search warrant, and during the course of that, we had a Mercedes parked in the driveway, which was unusual. Now this house, this address was, all the family members used this address to receive their benefits from or any correspondence to or from another agency. Once we executed the search warrant, we found a lot of high dollar items, including a strange jewel-encrusted hairdryer, $1,500 in cash. The lady had 2 Oregon Trail cards with different numbers. Oregon Trail card is essentially, in the state of Oregon, what you would receive your SNAP or your TANF benefits on. Those are put directly on the card, and you can use those like a debit card. Another Mercedes parked in the garage. When we looked through his files, he had a file for each member of his family, the ones that I showed you the picture of, and other ones that weren't there. And he kept very detailed notes and very detailed organizational items as to when the next appointment was, anything he should keep in order to prove that he's taking care of them, etc. Here's a lot of the receipts within those files, a lot of the receipts and the notifications from the Social Security Administration on things that he should keep track of. This one made a little bit of news once we conducted the arrest. Each of the 4 folks that were pictured in the beginning, we did have arrest warrants issued on those. Both Jason and his sister Kilda were arrested and later convicted. They both had to serve a little bit of time in federal prison, not much, but they both are held joint and several for over $200,000 in loss. Iskandar, the older gentleman, he will never come back into the country. And just last October, Zakia self-surrendered at the Portland International Airport, and we picked her up there, and we're going through plea negotiations with her right now. So again, this is a little case that we thought we just had one victim, and it blossomed because of the different folks that we had involved within our agency. We had, for the execution of the search and the arrest warrants, we had investigators from the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit there, from Health and Human Services OIG, from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Department, Housing and Urban Development OIG. We had everyone involved that could be possibly involved in that case or that was suffering a loss because of this family. On to the next example.
So the next example is an elder exploitation case that was worked out of this office that ended up getting a tremendous amount of both local and national and even international news coverage. But it is essentially at its heart a very classic elder exploitation case that was taken to extreme levels that even I, now having gone through the entire case, can still not believe. The basics of the case in terms of a short overview are as follows. Our victim in about 2004, went to a psychic shop in Bend, Oregon. When he went to that psychic shop, the psychic, whose name is Rachel Lee, and she is the mugshot to the left, the woman that's in the center, she was the quote-unquote psychic who was at the shop. She befriended the victim, and over the course of the next 10 years, she and her family members stole $15 million from the victim through a variety of schemes. They did this in part by convincing him that he was married and had a child, and in fact, there was no wife. He did not have a child. It was all fabrication designed to steal money from him. This very complex and fast-moving case developed over about a year's time. In March of 2014, a local detective who had never been to the social services fraud meeting before, from a town called Canby, began to work on what was at that time just suspicions of elder exploitation with this individual. There was actually Rachel Lee had a psychic shop that was in his town at the time, and there was suspicious activity with very high-end vehicles showing up, and they were very curious about the fact that the location was registered. The registered owner was an individual who lived in a remote part of the outer skirts of Portland, and the guy was essentially a tree farmer. There was sort of no reason that he would be associated with this entity. So the local detective did a couple subpoenas for bank information, and he immediately realized when he got the subpoenaed information back that there was more information there than he could handle and more detail than he had the time to dig into. So he reached out to someone and essentially said, where can I go for help with this? And he was invited to come to this meeting. He came to the social services meeting in early 2014, and he was able to get someone who was willing to assist him on sort of a nonprofit basis with doing an analysis of the bank records. Once that initial analysis was completed, they realized that this was a much larger case. They brought the case back to the meeting, and an IRS criminal investigations agent agreed to pick up the case to work with the local Canby detective, and our office agreed to prosecute anything that came from this case. So it was very instrumental in just the very beginning of developing information from this case. Quite frankly, it went even further than that, because there were individuals who were part of the group who knew our victim personally, who had historical information, and who were able to jump in and help with the case. Later on, months later, when we were getting ready to arrest Rachel Lee, who was the primary perpetrator, and her daughter, Portia Lee, who was pictured to the right, the victim was still, as those of you who work with elder exploitation victims know, he was still very much under the spell of Rachel Lee. He was unwilling to really call her out as a perpetrator. He believed Rachel was his best friend and that Rachel had his best interests in mind. The victim had not been sort of physically separated from Rachel Lee for many years. He had been isolated from his family. And so when we arrested Rachel and Portia, the victim was with them and then suddenly was isolated. The day before the arrest, actually the same day as the arrest, we had a social services and welfare fraud group meeting, and I came to the meeting and I said, look, I have a victim who's going to be left all alone if we can't find someone to help him immediately, because we are picking up the perpetrator. And we certainly didn't want to expose the victim to more risk as a result of the arrest. There happened to be that day a representative from the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs who works with individuals to set up emergency conservatorships. He specifically did work with military veterans, and it just so happened that our victim was a military veteran. So we were able to connect with that individual and work with some neighbors of our victim to get an emergency conservatorship set up so that at least financially he would be taken care of, and the court then appointed an attorney on his behalf who we continued to work with throughout the investigation. The case wrapped up in less than a year. Rachel Lee ended up with a sentence of approximately 8.5 years. we were able to recoup millions in dollars of assets for the victim, cash, houses, vehicles, and really we did all that only because of the connections we were able to make at that meeting. If you're interested in the case itself, it was actually featured as an episode on 2020 called The Sweetheart Swindle in 2015. And last year, American Greed ran a full episode on this case also. They called that one the Psychic Fiends Network. It was on last season. So it's a fascinating story. And of course, when you watch the television shows, you get the components of the case that television found interesting. There's no mention of the fact that this case never would have come together if it wasn't for the efforts of so many people who were really working towards a single cause, which was to help victims of elder exploitation.
That was a fun case. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that one of the buy-ins you get when you're trying to start up these units or these work groups is really to offer training. You know, everyone loves free training, and the training that we have fits in with our meetings. And it only takes about maybe 15 to 20 minutes depending on the presenter. And again, it's understanding the reason we wanted to do trainings early on was because we wanted to understand different programs or different agencies that had benefits that we weren't aware of. So for example, we've had the Department of Education, OIG, give us a presentation on grants, things like that. Housing and Urban Development, OIG, gave us a presentation on FHA, loan fraud, Section 8 fraud, anything that they manage. The Internal Revenue Service, their criminal investigations group, has given us training on identity theft and tax fraud. From the state level, we've had the Oregon Office of Adult Abuse Prevention and Investigation. They gave us a presentation on the demographics of victims within the state of Oregon, you know, who the perpetrators were traditionally or you know, who the victims are. It was a really interesting one. And then finally, every year, and Donna will talk more about this, that we have the Financial Crimes and Digital Evidence, which is separate from our work group, but we always highlight that and encourage our members to show up for that.
Yeah, so we have a long-standing, actually this will be the 17th year, conference that occurs in the state called the Financial Crimes and Digital Evidence Conference. We're in again, as I said, this year will be the 17th year. It's a 2.5-day event, and the primary focus is to provide really high-quality training for individuals who work financial fraud cases. So anyone from state, federal, and local law enforcement to state agency investigators, and even folks in the private sector. So bank security and also loss prevention individuals in the community, to bring all those folks together for, again, really high quality training, but at a very cheap price. We only charge currently $195 for 2.5 days of training. It's long been our practice. I'm actually part of a board, a nonprofit board that runs the training. This training is not run by the U.S. Attorney's Office or by the State Attorney General's Office. However, both organizations support the mission of the nonprofit, which is to hold this 2.5-day training and really to strengthen the networks for the individuals who work these cases. You know, it's wonderful that we're able to get groups of people together once a month, but it's also great that once a year we're typically able to get approximately 200 attendees together for 2.5 days of intensive training. And in addition to training on all the aspects of fraud, almost every year for the last 5 years there's been an hour or 2-hour-long training that deals specifically with elder exploitation. Because for everyone who is working in a fraud landscape right now, we know it's one of the largest challenges we have is to keep ahead of the criminals when it comes to financial exploitation. And we really work hard to make sure that's a component of the training. And every year when we are planning our agenda for the Financial Crimes Conference, we make sure we're bringing that information to the social services group, because we know that those folks will be the heart and soul of the attendees at the event. And so we ask folks what kinds of sessions they'd like to see, what kind of content is the preferred content, what's new and cutting edge that we need to hear about, and what kinds of resources are out there that maybe have developed over the last year that we haven't talked about. So while it's a separate entity, the Financial Crimes and Digital Evidence Conference ends up being a very interesting, supportive component to the social services group. And I do believe that both entities essentially have a shared mission, and we support each other in that shared mission throughout the year.
So, how do you get started? How do you start up one of these groups in your area? My suggestion has always been partner with the local OIG field offices. It doesn't matter if they're USDA OIG, Health and Human Services OIG, or Social Security Administration OIG. Everyone knows who the FBI is and DEA is, but these OIG agents are out there dealing every day with program fraud, elder abuse victims. They have a much deeper understanding of the way these programs work, and by engaging them, you're really going to bring them into the fold and make them buy into it and want to run the meetings for you. If you're at an office, you know who your agents are, you know who the go-getters are out there within your federal law enforcement community. Ask them to get involved in this. Just collaborating with agencies that have similar missions, so the food stamps, the Medicaid, public housing, invite all those groups. Again, offer free training and educating your fellow prosecutors or your counterparts within your office, internally and externally, about what you'd like to see and where to go. So examples of outreach, really just reaching out again to the special agent in charge of the local field offices, getting them engaged in the idea of this group. Attend other social services agency training. So a lot of times agencies will put on training about specific things such as Section 8 housing. Go to those trainings, engage the agents there, try to get them to start something similar in your group. And know your local prosecutors. That's a big one. So we're not just trying to grab the U.S. Attorney's Office. We also want the local prosecutors that are dealing with the elder abuse cases day in and day out at the county level. Our motto, again, we had the mission statement. Now we've got the motto: detect the fraud, disrupt the fraud, deter the fraud, and defend the public money when it comes to our working group. We're going to kind of wrap up, but if you have any questions for me or for Donna in the future, there's our information. My OIG also has a bunch of different links. They have a YouTube page, they have a Twitter account. We also have our page there, our homepage for our OIG account. So if you need something from us, feel free to contact us. And time for questions. And we've got a few here in the box that we've got, so I'll go ahead and read those aloud, and then I'll try to answer them for you. The first question is, how do you invite new organizations to attend the meeting? Do you invite them in person, word of mouth, persuasive white paper invitation? I've done almost all the above. I haven't quite written a white paper, but I have written a lengthy email as to the benefit for an agency to join. I like to do mine mainly in person and invite that person either over the phone or in person. I just think it's a better fit for what we do. But we also invite our members to bring people in to the meetings if they think they have that they can be an advocate or they would have a use for our group. So we can do any of those. The second question is, do you have an MOU with these organizations? No, we don't have an MOU. It's really not necessary. Again, these are just investigators and prosecutors that are getting together to discuss trends or specific cases that they need assistance with. When you say share information, what do you mean? Actual information about an individual case? Yes, it could be actual information about an individual case that we're working on, or it could be fraud trends that we're seeing in the community, or that we've heard, through the grapevine that on the East Coast, if a fraud starts, it will head towards us, or if there's fraud schemes that are going on down in California, it's going to go up I-5. So we know to be prepared for that.
I will also say, though, that typically what happens is someone will come to the table and, one agency is investigating, Joe Schmo for potential crimes, and the person will come to the meeting and say, hey, I'm looking for information related to Joe Schmo. And so if you've got an open case on the guy or something that's going on, please contact me after the meeting. So we encourage people, to share information in a more confidential setting. Obviously, a number of the agencies have restrictions on what they can and can't share, and there's lots that we can't share when we're at the table, but again, you can share information when you're sharing it for the purpose of developing your investigation, and so we try and be careful about that, and I think that all the participants are sensitive to the fact that sort of what happens at the welfare fraud group stays there unless it's for purposes of developing someone's case.
So I think the next question here from Joe Rodriguez, do we ever have cases for residents of nursing homes or assisted living facilities? If so, do you involve the long-term care ombudsman? We do work those cases. Normally we're working those in conjunction with the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, but I normally don't reach out to an ombudsman just because they serve a different purpose than what we're doing with the investigation. So yes, we work on those. Those types of cases are brought to us frequently, and we discuss those in the group setting. The next question here is, do you think this is a replicable model? What are going to be the barriers people should be thinking about? So this is absolutely, you can do this in any location. Usually people are they really worry about what they can or can't discuss in one of the meetings. So we always tell the individual, stay within your agency's policy. If you can't share specific information, then don't. But you should be able to at least share enough to say, this is the type of case that I'm working on. This is the victim that I have. This is the suspect that I have. Does anybody have experience with this, or is there any other agency out there that may be able to assist me with getting information about Section 8 housing, or an agency that can help me with the SNAP? That's kind of where we were able to, after we have our formal meeting, usually those agents that have a nexus will come and approach that person and say, hey, I can help you. What do you need? We hold the meetings monthly. Do you discuss cases at the meeting? Yes, we discuss cases at the meeting. We have to, as investigators. We want to get that information out there as much as we can and discuss ideas on how to solve the investigation. Are you working these cases collaboratively? Yes, that's one of the whole reasons we created the group, so that we could save a lot of time and energy in court chasing by working together on a case, on a similar subject for a victim, and get that victim either assistance and also find out more about the bad guy and try to collaborate and get them taken care of and prosecuted. Let's see, I'm looking here.
Go up. We're kind of looking to see if we've got any more questions. It looks like we may have answered most of them.
Donna, Jane, this is Yolanda, Campbell. So there was one more question that came in. I don't know if you saw it, but the question was, are there ever cases for residents of nursing homes or assisted living facilities?
Yeah, we already answered that one.
Oh, you did? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I don't think there's any more. If anyone else has any questions real fast, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, we'll plan on ending the webinar a little early today.
Well, thanks again so much, everyone, for listening in. And again, if I can help you at all or help you set up something similar, please feel free to contact me.
And the same for me. We're certainly willing to take questions as people need assistance. And we think it's great that this particular series is being initiated through the Elder Justice Initiative.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.